Anne-Louise from Minerva, and I'm here today to sew along with you this vintage So La Di Da men's Mr London waistcoat. Waistcoats are an excellent jump into menswear. I really enjoy making them. They make excellent gifts or a great piece to add to your wardrobe to smarten up your suit or your jeans and shirt. This pattern features everything a good waistcoat should have: a faux collar, welts, and the fabric used for the front extends slightly round the shoulders to act as a contrasting trim. And we're going to have a look into hand sewn buttonholes for two reasons. One, I really enjoy hand sewn buttonholes, and two, my sewing machine that does buttonholes is broken, but mainly the first thing. The waistcoat can be made in all your best recommended waistcoat fabrics: wool, tweed and cotton. You can also amp up the fanciness with velvet or silk. Of course, everything we talk about today is available on Minerva right now and will be linked down below, and will pop up throughout this video for your ease of shopping. So let's get started. These are our delightful fabric picks. Our main dark wine woven wool, polyester and viscose blend fabric. It has a light herringbone pattern woven with dark coloured fibres. It has the feel of high quality wool without the high quality wool price tag. It has that textured fluffy feel that comes from wool with the durability of polyester. For our lining we have this deep red iridescent paisley jacquard, which is also used for the back of the waistcoat. It catches the light in the most fabulous way. As it's woven, it does have a tendency to fray, so working carefully with it is important. It also works so beautifully with our chosen main waistcoat fabric. Then for our interfacing, we have this natural coloured woven interfacing with tailored patterns like this one. I much prefer a sewn interfacing, especially for wool and wool blends, as they're heat sensitive. It can take a little more effort, but I think it's worth it. It has a softer effect on the fabric. It doesn't change the look or the feel so dramatically as iron-on. You'll also need 7 buttons and your matching thread. There are quite a few waistcoat puzzle pieces to go together. So these are the main wool fabric pieces and their corresponding interfacing pieces. When cutting out, don't forget to mark the position of the welts and tabs. We're working with a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance unless otherwise stated. Then these are our lining and back pieces and our shiny paisley fabric. To attach the sew-on interfacing, we're going to use a pad stitch, which is most commonly used in tailoring. It's a running stitch that secures 2 or more layers together. They can also be used to add a curve to lapels and undercollars. It's made by picking up just 1 or 2 threads on the right side of the fabric, running the needle between the fashion fabric and the interfacing, and then running the thread diagonally up, keeping the stitches that are shown on the front small because they are staying in. These are all our interfaced pieces, so the back armhole facings, lapels and front facings. We then make up the darts on our lining back pieces and our main back pieces. I like to mark both sides with a chalk and then match them up to form crisp, smart looking darts. Unfortunately, humans aren't straight up and down, so we need to add darts and shaping so the clothes fit us. Do you have any dart hacks? Let us know in the comments below. The waistcoat actually originated in Persia and first became fashionable in the West in the 17th century. The famous diarist Samuel Pepys made a note of this change in fashion in 1666 when King Charles II was persuaded that a much more sober style of dress was needed for the gentleman after so many tragedies like the Black Death and the Fire of London, especially as the French court started to display such extravagance in their wardrobes. Follow the marked points up the dart diagonally, running the machine off at the end of the darts to prevent any weird bubbly bits. Then, with right sides together, we're attaching the back armbands to the back outside layer. Because the fabrics are quite different in thickness and temperaments, it's a good idea to pin thoroughly and baste, matching notches and edges. While at the sewing machine, with right sides together, we're sewing back seams together on both the lining and the back piece. Trim and clip edges to ensure that the curved edge lies flat. Press armband seam allowance towards the centre back and press centre back seam allowance open. The original waistcoat was a knee-length affair that had a similar shape to the coat, but with a much tighter fit. Just a few years after King Charles II started wearing them, they were the most fashionable garments in Europe, and soon the move to a more sombre style of dress went out the window. This is our progress so far. Our right side back piece made up and pressed, and one lining piece made up and pressed as well. We now move on to our lapels. With right sides together, sew the lining to the lapel on the outside edge only. When sewing the lapel, pivot the needle at the points and dips to get that crisp finish. By the 1700s, few waistcoats had collars or sleeves, and they mainly reached to the knee. Some heavily embroidered waistcoats fastened at the front with hook and eye closures. Trim and clip the lapels and turn them out. I like to use a thick knitting needle just to push the points out and give them a really good press. Double-breasted waistcoats became more popular during the first part of the 18th century, and by the later part of the century, fabrics with stripes were all the rage. The overriding principle at this time was that if it was highly decorated and heavily embellished, it was fashionable. Some particularly fancy gentlemen took to wearing two waistcoats at once. Once they're turned out, now is a really good time to hold them together and check they're both a reasonably equal shape. Place the lapels wrong side down on the front right sides of the waistcoat and baste in place. Making up the welts is super duper easy. Using the width of your machine foot, sew them down with the right sides together at the edges, trim corners and sides. Welts can be functional as a hidden pocket or decorative to add a fun and interesting detail. While we're at the sewing machine, we're also sewing our back tabs right sides together, using the width of our machine foot as the seam allowance. Once the welts are turned out and pressed, use the marks made earlier to place welts on the right side front of the waistcoat. Place them above the marks, raw edges lined up with the top mark. Sew in place using the width of the sewing machine foot as the seam allowance. Ironing wool and wool blends is fairly easy. It's good practice to use a fabric scrap between your main fabric and the iron as a pressing cloth, or the iron will smooth out all that fluffy texture. Use lots of steam and a medium to high heat, or the wool setting on your iron. Iron welts down towards the bottom over their little raw edges. It's best to use either a dry cloth and lots of steam, or a damp cloth with a dry iron. You can hand stitch or machine stitch the welts into place. I like to slip stitch them down, making sure that they're flush against the front of the waistcoat, so there's no weird buckles. Once sewn into place, give them another good press. During the 1900s, the waistcoat starts to fade a little from fashionable wardrobes. It started to be just something to hold a pocket watch in or to finish off formal attire. But still, the rise of wristwatches and the lean towards softer suits meant that the waistcoat was becoming less and less essential. With right sides together, match notches and edges of the front lining and front lining facing pieces. This can be a little tricky and may look as if they won't fit. However, as with all sewing, a little patience gets the job done. Try matching notches and edges first, then easing in the lining to fill the spaces left. Pin these two pieces together with either an unnecessary amount of pins or baste the lining and facing pieces together. Stitch in place. As both these shapes are so curved, it's best to secure them as much as possible before sewing is started. Once we have trimmed and clipped our edges and pressed our seam allowance away from the facing pieces, it's time to start getting our front and back pieces together. We start with the shoulders of the lining, with right sides together, match notches and sew in place. Repeat this step on our outer pieces. You'll notice how nicely the lapels and facing pieces come together. One begins as the other stops, creating a super smart look. Before we start attaching our lining and outer fabric, we need to place and baste in our tabs at the notches on the outer back of the waistcoat. I just want to take a quick break here at the halfway mark to talk about our wonderful community here at Minerva. We really want to encourage everyone to take up something crafty. At the top right of the post, you will be able to follow Minerva and keep up to date with offers, new releases, general fabric prettiness, and of course tutorials, sew-alongs and our top pattern picks. Let us know what you would like to see next. Comment below. We'd love to hear what you think. It's time to attach back and front of the waistcoat right sides together. It's best to lay one piece completely flat, starfish style, on the floor, your cutting table or on any flat surface. Then drape the other onto it, making sure to take time matching edges, notches and seams. I like to pin the big things in place first, like your centre back seams, shoulder seams and notches, then ease the rest in. Make sure not to pull or push edges to line up, especially the lining, or it will get pulled through to the outside. More recently, we have seen the revival of the waistcoat for casual dress and work attire, helped by celebrities like Gary Barlow, Tom Ford and Gareth Southgate. They show off just how stylish a waistcoat can be. Is there any clothing item you're ready or not ready to see back in people's wardrobes? Let us know down below. We're then pinning the waistcoat along both armholes, bottom edge, and starting at the bottom edge of the side round the neckline to the opposite edge, basically stitching everything but the side seams. Once sewn, give every curved edge a good clip and trim corners as well. Now, my favourite part of waistcoat making, turning out. We're reaching into the side seam up through the shoulders and pulling the front down and the right way out. Once our waistcoat is the right way out, we're going to go ahead and give him a good press. Now our waistcoat is the right way out and looking all pressed and pretty, we sew our side seams together, pinning them inside the lining with our usual seam allowance, catching the main join of the front end lining, extending the stitch line about 2.5 centimeters into our lining fabric as we stitch, so we sew some of our lining together as we go. Once stitched in place, we iron the side seams open and flat. As this section is hidden by lining, we don't need to worry about preserving the texture, so I'm not using a pressing cloth to protect it. Once the seam is ironed flat, I am taking the lining and ironing the seam allowance under, ready to be sewn down. We then slip stitch the lining together, making nice little invisible stitches. This lining fabric is so nice to iron and it comes out so crisply. There's something so satisfying about pulling the stitches through and watching those two pieces come together. Now for the most technical part of this project, placing buttons. I'm using the button marks on the front piece of the pattern, lining up the edges and pinning through the pattern to give me an idea of where the buttons need to be. I like to get my ruler and tape measure out and to make sure everything is in the right place. I think it's worth it. It means there's no buckling and nothing pulled in a weird direction. It's a good idea to measure the buttons with a flexible tape measure, including the depth and width of the button to get the length of the buttonhole needed. Once the length of the buttonhole is marked out, you need to decide on how wide the buttonhole stitch needs to be. I typically go for 1/2 centimetre each side. Of course, if you're doing this by machine, it's already set for you. To hand sew buttonholes, you need to cut the buttonholes first with either a little pair of scissors or my favourite sewing item, a button chisel, hence my cutting board. I like to work away from myself, inserting the needle through the buttonhole and up through the ½ centimetre mark, and do one normal stitch and back round the cut mark. Then, with your thread firmly anchored, bring the needle the same way again, but only about halfway through. This time, loop the tail end of the thread under then behind the top of the needle to form a knot. I find it best to pull the thread up, then move the knot down as I pull the thread through to make them all neat and tidy. Keep the knot at the edge of the buttonhole, as this is the best way to prevent fraying. Keep repeating these stitches as close as you can to one another and stitch all the way down the first side. Then we do a bar stitch, 3 to 4 stitches, all the 1 centimetre across the end of the buttonhole. Then carry on with the stitch on the other side, and finally another bar stitch to finish our buttonholes. Wool, similar to this one, has been used in clothing for centuries. The wool trade was once so important to the UK that special wool tax laws were imposed, and at one point in time, the presiding officer of the House of Lords was sat on a chair stuffed with wool as a symbol of preeminence. And during the 16th century, Spain only allowed the export of merino lambs, a sheep that produced a highly valued type of wool, with royal permission. Have you made anything with wool? Let us know in the comments. After we do the final bar stitch, tie the end securely with a knot, and hide the thread between the layers of fabric. You didn't forget the buttons on the tabs, did you? Because I did. So I did a little cheat on them, just attaching them to the back of the waistcoat with a button. And there we have it, a superb, if I do say so myself, vintage style waistcoat. The two fabrics work so well together, the colours complementing each other wonderfully, as well as the varied difference in texture. Fit for any lord of a house. Apparently it's very comfortable and is being saved for the fanciest of occasions. It's surprisingly easy to bring all those waistcoat pieces together. Those faux lapels make life so much easier. Its classic lines, shapes and details are sure to make an entrance. Here at Minerva, we love to hear your views. What would you like to make with this fabric combo? What fabric would you use for this So La Di Da pattern? Any questions, comment below and we'd be happy to answer them. And don't forget, Minerva Craft Club members get a 10% discount for 12 months when they sign up. And creating a free account, you'll get a welcome present of a discount coupon. So join us with our lovely community of makers, follow, comment and like, and we'll see you next time.